What about addenda? I get a lot of questions about
All
addenda.
right. Like what? What's a question you get a lot about Addenda?
I get a lot of questions about explaining away a low score on the
Yeah.
LSAT or a
Yeah.
low GPA.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the low scores. We don't, all addenda should be arguments that are crafted using facts, and they should not be emotional pleas. Okay. You build your case with the facts, and addendum is the strongest lawyering you do in your application. Okay. So if someone's trying to make a case that their standardized test scores don't reflect their abilities, they have to juxtapose that with strong academic abilities. So that's not for the person who has a 2.0 from undergrad and no other grades to point to, right? You cannot make a strong argument saying my LSAT scores fail to represent my academic potential when you don't have academic potential to balance it with. And I think that's a common mistake people make is they just say, oops, my LSAT sucks. It's not indicative of who I am. And then a separate paragraph, oops, my GPA sucks. That's also not indicative of who I am. But they're not pointing to anything that says what is indicative of their potential. So that's one kind of mistake that people make in addendum. Another is when people are trying to make the case that a certain LSAT score or a certain trend in their LSAT scores isn't indicative of their abilities. And that can look like a lot of different things, but I think the biggest mistake people make there is oversharing. Like they've had 12 setbacks in their life in the last 2 years. My cat died, my mom got sick, then my grandma died, and then this and that. And all of those things are probably true, and all of them probably really did impact their ability to focus on the LSAT, but it shows poor judgment and oversharing to the schools. It shows that you're not really capable of handling your normal life disasters. And how will you do that in law school if all of that upset you? And number three, not great judgment about actually taking the LSAT under those circumstances, right? I mean, if someone says to me, oh, I got into a car accident the night before and I didn't sleep and I was in the ER till 2 a.m., well, then don't go take the LSAT, right? So I think that's the second trap people fall into with an LSAT addendum is a list of excuses that actually show poor judgment rather than allay any concerns about what the scores actually were.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It can end up just kind of being a laundry list of sorrows that you've experienced.
I see it all the time. And I usually would tell someone in that case to pick the strongest one, right? Pick the one that's like the biggest impact and talk about that. But now that you can take the LSAT so many times in a year, and that'll only increase in the coming year, I'm actually counseling people to do LSAT addenda less frequently than I used to. Okay. I've gotten very hard on people about it this year in a way that I wasn't before the Take It Unlimited Times new standard, right? When people could only take it 3 times, sometimes we had to explain, right? Why they couldn't take it again. So we had to say something. But most LSAT addenda, the answer to someone writing to me about why all these things happened that impacted their score, the answer is always, well, then take it again. Well, then take it again if it's not the right score for you. Show us what the right score is. So I'm a little tougher on people about it now. With the people who have a history of poor standardized test taking juxtaposed with high GPAs, they should still write that.
Yeah. Okay. They have the proof. They have the proof of their ability.
They have the proof. And the way absolutely. And the way you up level it is by looking up the numbers of your entering class in college and what their SAT or ACT score was, and that yours was low for that, yet you graduate in the top 10% of your class. That's the way to write it.
So you're making a reasoned argument.
Of course. I mean, and that's what lawyers do, believe it or not, right? I mean, successful lawyers, good lawyers. So that's what you have to do is and in fact, that's what you do in law school too, is you pull out the relevant facts and you make an argument with it. And that's really what an addendum is to be able to recognize which facts are relevant and which support your conclusion and which don't.
Yeah. So that's like a clear case where it's perfectly reasonable. You can show that you outperform your numbers on a standardized test in the past. But what about something like on test day, the proctors were really distracting, or with the digital
LSAT again?
Yeah. How about this? The digital LSAT starting this year, July, and then September, full force. Everyone's going to be like, oh, I did poorly because it was my first time on the digital LSAT.
Take it again.
Yeah.
Just take it again.
Yeah. No need to explain
away. Forget the addendum. Just take it again. I mean, there's no reason to over-explain. Law schools are pretty tired of all these extra explanations. And by the way, it always seems to be the people who have 1,000 things to explain who want to explain everything, right? So the person who has the character and fitness, the minor in consumption of alcohol, the the dorm noise infractions, the bad LSAT taking, the upward trend in the GPA, whatever it is, my dog got sick, my grade sucked. Like, it's always that person who wants to take time to say each and everything. And then what happens is that overwhelms all the positive stuff in the application. Like anything great about the resume or anything interesting about the personal statement. Then you're like, oh God, but this, but that, but that. Like, choose what needs to be there to make the application stronger and let the rest go.
Yeah. So after a certain point, nobody wants to hear it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, and if you know you're someone who has things you have to report, right? Like you have to report the character and fitness things, then be very judicious about what else you choose to report.
Yeah. You also don't want to draw attention to these things too much.
Right. I mean,
good things too.
Some people will say to me, Anne, I have a withdrawal from my freshman year. I had to take classes pass, no pass, and then I was absent, so I got a no pass. Like, if you have one of those, like, let it go. If you have a history of withdrawals that looks funny, like there was something else going on in your life, you might want to explain that. And to be honest, it also depends on the level of school to which you're applying, right? I mean, how much those things matter changes based on the law school itself.
So that'll be a little bit luck of the draw is what you're saying, and maybe you want to apply more places.
Well, I think what I mean by that more is that a law school that's unranked, for example, and I never use that term unranked, but you know, everyone knows what I mean. Okay, so a law school that you're not applying to because ranked, but like it's your neighborhood law school, okay, or regional law school. I don't worry so much about a withdrawal or two or a no pass. If you're applying to Yale, Stanford, Harvard, Columbia, and you've got a couple of no passes, they probably should be explained.
That makes sense. There's just a different level that they're looking for.
A different level, yeah, and it's a higher threshold, and they don't have a lot of reason to admit someone. There are more reasons to not admit someone. So, I mean, that's a pessimistic way of looking at it, but when we're just talking numbers, it's kind of true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. There are some realities there. But what about, aside from withdrawal in classes, a low GPA in general? Is that the sort of thing where if you have a good reason, a good excuse, a good explanation, you do want to explain?
Absolutely. If there's something people aren't going to know, they should know. So for example, if you had a lot of family responsibilities during college, or that's something that the law schools wouldn't otherwise know, you need to share that. Sometimes it comes up in a diversity statement. Sometimes it comes up in a personal statement. If it doesn't, addendum is a perfectly appropriate time to share that. If you had to work full time to support yourself in college, that can also be expressed on a resume too. But if there are factors that really influence GPA, yes, they should be explained to the law school. If it's your typical, oh, I had a tough time adjusting to college, I might just take it easy and just point out the upward trend and be done with it. It just depends on the person and what the story is, you know.
Yeah, every situation's unique.